outcome of a war, okay, or the falling of a kingdom.
Right.
But what Phil is talking about is if that prophecy is open and published and everybody knows about it, people can do a couple things. Number one, they can just make the claim that it happened, right? Like they can say later, yeah, this thing did occur and it aligned with prophet, and they're just making it up. The other thing they can do is they can actually make the prophecy happen, right? So we see that right now ongoing with like the nation of Israel. It fulfills all these prophecies to have Israel recreated. And so we've got people who are actually actively pushing to force it to happen because they believe the prophecy. And so they make it happen. And it's like, look, the prophecy is fulfilled. It's like, no, you basically saw this thing published that said this was supposed to happen. And then you went and forced it to happen.
I can make the prophecy that I will not be on this show next week.
Yeah. And he'll probably be right.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's, and all he has to do is look at the schedule. It's published. He's not on it, so he won't be here, right? I mean, it's pretty simple. And so when it comes to things like prophecy, the other problem is that there are things when they'll say, Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies, but the prophecies aren't about Jesus, right? So they'll have a prophecy that's about somebody else.
And there was one where Jesus intentionally fulfilled a prophecy, and the gospel says that he knew the prophecy, so he had his followers go steal a donkey. And I think if they stole the donkey from a farmer on a Sunday, they broke 2 of the 10 commandments just so he could fulfill a prophecy that he knew about.
And I have no idea. I didn't know they stole that donkey.
Yeah, they stole it.
But anyway, prophecy's generally not all that impressive, right? And the other thing is, if you ask Jews if Jesus fulfilled all their messianic prophecies, they're going to tell you no, right? So the people that actually, the culture that gave us those prophecies don't believe that Jesus fulfilled them. And so you've got Christians basically telling the Jews they don't know how to read their own books.
Yeah.
And, so it just, the whole thing is just a mess. Prophecy is just a mess. And there's nothing impressive about it. The few times I don't know, I'm not that impressed with prophecy. So does that cover prophecy, or do you have any other questions on that?
That makes that makes perfect sense to me. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So another small point to think about would be the subjugation of women in the Bible.
Okay.
I hear it come up sometime on the show, but we never really get into full detail as to like clear examples of this or how to properly address it.
How to do what?
How to properly address this issue of the subjugation of women in the Bible, or the lack of women's rights in the Bible. I've heard this being discussed on the show, but I haven't really gotten into full detail about like specific examples of this.
In the New Testament, Paul wasn't really into women having a whole lot of influence in the church.
Women were not allowed to teach a man.
Yeah, and you couldn't speak. And if you had a question about something that was talked about in church, you had to keep quiet. And then when you got home, ask your husband to tell you what it meant. And they should, not ever cut their hair. And if they did cut their hair, they should wear a veil.
And they should cover their hair because the giant angels come down and rape them. But it's clear over and over and over. And you can go to like evilbible.com or some other sources and find endless examples of where women are second-rate citizens. And it's really easy to solve because that's wrong. And they're not. They should be equal in all ways.
And I mean, this is New Testament stuff. You could go back to the Old Testament, it gets worse.
Yeah.
The New Testament is pretty tame by comparison, right? Like in the Old Testament, it was just pretty horrendous.
Or you can look up Lot's daughters. That's a fun one.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a story. Early porn.
Yeah.
Early fetish porn.
Daddy porn.
Yeah.
Whoa, daddy.
And so they...
those daughters had an amazing skill because they had to get their dad drunk enough to apparently not know he's screwing his own daughters, but yet not so drunk that he could actually screw his own daughters.
Right. It's like,
there's a fine line there.
I got to say, for an old dude being that drunk...
Bang a gong, get it on.
That's virile.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, but anyway.
And you know why they did that? Because he didn't have any legitimate heirs. Because they were women. They were his daughters. They don't count.
Yeah, that's right.
So the only way they could get him legitimate heirs was to screw him and produce sons.
Yeah. Oh, interesting factoid about American slavery, like U.S. slavery, right? It used to be that they were trying to base it on biblical slavery. But in the Bible, if you had a slave that had your children, they were your children.
Yeah, that's not cool.
No, but I'm just saying, if you had a woman that was like kept as a slave either by your wife or by you, and you had children with her, those children were considered to be
Your responsibility.
Your legitimate children. Yeah. Like you said, the women children could not be heirs, but they were still the master's children.
Yeah.
But then in the U.S., we had some laws, some cases, early court cases, where people sued and said, my father was free, and so I am free, according to the setup. And they won. And then immediately they changed the laws to say that if you have children by your slave, they're slaves. They're not free. They're like the slave's kids, right? Not your kids. And so one of my friends pointed out, and he's like, the sick thing there is that you had people selling their own children into slavery.
And it comes down to power. It comes down to money. And allegedly one of the reasons the Catholic Church said their priests can't get married is because they would be married and then have children. And the church would have to take care of the priest's children when the priest died.
And this is a messed up aside. This is like a so messed up aside. But it's like, I can't imagine having babies so that you can prosper by selling them all into slavery. It's like, what in the world were we doing? Like,
money.
Wild. And it was supposedly like a response to the fact that you couldn't import them anymore, so you just made your own.
Yeah.
Woo. And so, but anyway, with regard to the women's subjugation, Google women keep silent in the churches. Women not teach a man. If you Google those, you'll get some verses. I will warn you that there are apologetic responses, so you can go and look at church responses because there are, obviously churches that have women pastors. Those churches do not interpret those verses in the way that anybody else reading them would. So when you look at those passages, see what you think about them first. Give them a full reading. Don't just look at the verse. Look at the chapter and, get your own assessment there based on the context. And then go out and look at what these other folks are saying and see if you think it makes more sense or less sense.
Well, that is a great idea. I'll definitely look further into that.
Yeah.
So just two more small points to touch up on. I've been in some debates before, and one in particular comes to mind where this individual tried. He was telling me about he was giving pretty much miracle claims, specifically a claim in which there was a miracle claim that was witnessed by many people, more than 8. He said, I don't really remember the specifics, but like some miracle happened, and he said that there were like 8 or 16 people in the room, and they all saw this at the same time, so it couldn't have been a hallucination because all of these people saw the same thing. And I know that's an appeal to personal experience, but I don't really know how I'm able to address that.
Yeah,
story.
you can't address it because there's no way to recreate it, right? This isn't something that you're going to be able to see again.
I would address it by asking if they've ever heard of Penn and Teller. Because you can go to magic shows today where thousands of people can see something happen that seems miraculous and none of them can explain it.
But I mean, let's say that you and I and Phil, getting our kicks on, we pull out a Ouija board and we start playing with the Ouija board. And we start asking this Ouija board like really intensely personal questions no one knows the answer to. And like we're getting, me and you are playing and we're telling Phil all about his history and his brain is blowing because we're right and we're telling him his grandmother's middle name and his, great-grandfather's first daughter's, name. And like the whole, like stuff that just could not even be possible, like way beyond the bounds of what we would say would be like coincidence. And this happens, and we're all there, and we all experience this. And then we go out and we start telling people, like, you're not going to believe what happened, right? Like we did the Ouija board, and it was telling us all these things about Phil's life, and he didn't even have his hands on the board. It was just, the two of us doing it. And it was me and Josh, and we're getting all this personal info. But we told him what his bank account was. And it was wild. When he showed it to us on his phone, and we were totally right down to the penny. I mean, just crazy stuff. So at the end of the day, number one, we don't know how we did it. Right?
Right.
We have no idea how we did it. We put our hands on a plastic thing that moves on a piece of wood, and we asked it a question, and it started giving us answers there's no way it could give us answers to. And we have no idea how that happened.
Now, so then it's just a matter of...
Now, we know that Parker Brothers... is selling it, and that it has a traditional history of being some kind of ghosts or demons or spirits or something but we don't know what that even means. What does that even mean? Is this Phil's grandmother's dead brain? I don't even, what is talking to us, right?
Unexplained does not mean God done it.
Right. And so first of all, you have to ask yourself, how much arguing and how much debunking do you want to do of miracle claims? Because there's a lot of miracle claims. The main problem with miracle claims is that nobody really knows how the miracles occurred. They know what they're going to tell you they think happened, but they can't show that they really have a cause, right? I like to say things that do not exist cannot be the cause of other things, right? So if I say God caused something, the first question is, does God exist?
Prove it.
Because if God doesn't exist, then God didn't cause it. And so the only way to know if God can be a cause is to know that there's a God that exists, right? So we've got this weird thing happen that we can't explain. And at the end of the day, if we want to say that a God is doing it, we need to demonstrate that there is a God. We need to demonstrate there's a God that talks to people through a wooden board and a plastic topper, and that it, cares about telling me about Phil's bank account, right? We have a lot to go back and fill in blanks for to get to God did it.
I think I now need to go change my password.
But I mean, that's for the ones you can't, so when someone comes on, for example, on the phone and they just tell me something that is just outrageous, right? And in my head, I'm inclined to say, you are probably lying to me. Usually it's rude to call somebody a liar. And so I will just say, if this happened to you, how do you know it was a God, right? How do you know that? I'm not going to say that it didn't happen. I'm going to say that there's no way I can know that it happened. You're telling me something that I agree would be really bizarre if it occurred. And I'm not sure that it did occur because even the story from a dozen people, there's more than a dozen people talking to me about alien abductions at, UConn or whatever that is, the UFO con.
That's real.
Yeah, but well, the other guy said, right, that was Yahweh was an alien, I think. And so, but the point is, miracles, they don't really demonstrate anything except that something weird happened.
Yeah. So in the end, they're basically just going to remain a mystery.
I mean, they're kind of fun to debunk if you have all the time in the world, but it's up to you. I mean, I've debunked a few that actually taught me things, right? I learned about a weird natural phenomenon of giant rainbow shadows that people can cast at certain angles in the mountains. And I was just like, wow, I didn't know that people could do this. Somebody was telling me a story about a giant rainbow shadow angel with no face. And when I was just like, what? And I went and looked it up, and there's pictures of this thing. It's it's a phenomenon, right? And I'm like, wow, that is so bizarre.
That's when you're above the clouds.
Yeah, it's just this weird thing that you get a little hiker and they cast this humongous shadow, and sometimes it has a rainbow effect.
I did that in Hawaii, actually.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. So you can actually learn some interesting things by going in and looking up miracles, but a lot of times it's just people that are, exaggerating whatever happened.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So I just got one last quick topic to poke on. So there's this idea that I've discussed with some theists about what exactly is preventing some people from knowing God or understanding Him or otherwise coming to the conclusion that He exists. And one thing that I often hear is that that human beings are somehow flawed or imperfect or fallible humans, and this somehow makes it harder for us to get there.
See, this is easy for me because about 20 years ago, I was in a Burger King, and God showed up and said, Phil, I want you to go make as many atheists as possible and keep doing that until I come back. And so that's what I've been doing. Yeah, it just claims that some people claim they know God. Some people claim that Yahweh is an alien.
Yeah, the question is, how do they know the claims are accurate?
Right.
Yeah.
So the idea that I get when I hear these things is that they're saying that because humans are flawed or because we're fallible, that's something that prevents us from
Yeah, but who made us
being
flawed
some
then?
sort of special site.
Well, no. Here's the thing, right? There's something called. Have you
black.
ever heard of the Euthyphro dilemma?
I've heard it, but I'm not quite sure if I.
EUTHYPHRO, something like that. Go Google it. Basically, it's an interesting question, right? So it basically asks a question about morality, and it leans toward what you're describing. It basically says, you trust God's morality because you have a flawed morality, and you don't know what's really moral, so you go with what God tells you is moral, right? That's the argument.
Right.
And so what Euthyphro is saying is, well, wait a minute. Is it moral because God said to do it? Or is there like actual morality and God is appealing to that and he sees it more clearly than we do? In which case, could we just figure out what's moral, or is God constrained by morality? Or like, how do we know God is more moral, right? How do you know that? And so what's interesting is, if you have a broken moral compass,
yeah, I knew you were,
and somebody is telling you to go and do a thing because it's moral, what are you using to judge that what they're telling you is actually morally correct?
Right, yeah.
So if you have flaws that make it impossible for you to know what's best, and God tells you something is best, based on what do you believe that? I mean, how do you assess that what he's telling you is best is actually
and
best?
how do you know that
can't.
he's the good guy, not the bad guy?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Glad we could help.
And
the Holy Spirit entering you, right?
And so God actually, I was kneeling and praying, and he actually took me to the base of the cross. And I saw Jesus, and I saw that he died for me. I know he died for everyone, but at that moment I knew that he would have done that just for me.
Excuse me real quick. You saw